Oh, it all looks very smart.
Il a,
Sit anywhere on the front row, so you'll know everyone there.
la notoriété, c'est tout.
Okay.
C'est ça qui est terrible. Il faut être célèbre. Voilà.
Il est des samedi, il a fait la longue tirade,
Ouais.
il reconnaîtra le président de la République, et ça ne sert à pas son président, il s'abstient, machin, etc. J'ai voté pour le Turc Mélenchon.
It's incredibly high. It's so funny.
Tu connais Astrolovic, là, qui
Ouais.
3 000 followers, tu vois,
Il l'a massacré, bien sûr.
et il l'a rapporté à tout le monde. Il a battu les fers avec Astrolovic, tu vois. Et là, maintenant, il s'est
Hey,
invité
how are you?
les Parisiens.
Good to see you. Nice to see you back. Yeah. Are you enjoying life? Not as much as the other two. Right. Yeah. Good. Yeah. That's quite something.
Moi, si elle n'avait pas tapé devant son fils sur Macron, comme elle a tapé sur Macron, dès que tu prononces le mot Macron, elle a la barre aux lèvres.
J'étais mon frère qui m'a écrit dimanche.
Enfin, franchement,
We
C'est
commissioned.
normal que son fils fasse comme ça.
I can't remember. He's a
Même dimanche.
South American artist. As the building was being occupied,
Il a eu un
actually,
petit nom.
painted
Il
and
n'appelle
stuff.
pas Macron, il appelle ce type.
c'est terrifiant.
Déjà élu, hein.
Déjà élu.
Ce type.
Non. Heureusement qu'il n'y a pas, comme la dernière fois, de réception avec Eldebine. Tu sais que quand il y a une réélection, le président ne va pas avec Eldebine.
When you want me to start?
You can start whenever. I'm live on Zoom now,
Already?
and I'm live streaming live to YouTube. We're not there. We're not back.
And do we know how many there are? I mean, it would be nice if you could tell me at some point how many.
I'll message you. Have you got your phone?
No, yeah, but how many are now? No, I know they.
I won't know. I'll message you. I mean, but if you just welcome the audience, and then I will, when you go back up on stage,
Yeah.
by then you'll know how many people there are.
But how will I know?
I will message you.
Right. How will you send it to me?
What's your preferred? WhatsApp?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, I'll WhatsApp you.
Okay, fine.
So I'll WhatsApp you.
No.
I mean, I can tell you. I'm going to see how many people are filing in now. And then as soon as you go up on stage, I will put the one with the 3 names.
Ah oui.
J'espère que Danemark va prendre dans la gueule pour aussi, qu'il ne va pas l'armer. Tu vois, je vais quelqu'un qui diminue les stages, les préparations pour le juillet. Non. Un peu qu'on envoyé la photo. Des villes qui est là. Il a fait un stage de préparation. Des préparations. Comment on fait une campagne de juillet? Au Danemark, avec des slides. Pour les campagnes, voilà qu'il faut savoir. Monsieur Bouzer.
Incroyable. Et tu sais qu'il veut être sénateur. Tu sais qu'il veut être sur la liste PS à Paris. J'espère quand même qu'il ne fera pas la connerie de le soutenir. Parce que je vais te dire, la moitié des gens du groupe parlementaire ne voteront pas pour lui. Ce sera un camouflet, mais terrible. Comme en plus c'est un vote secret.
Vous savez qu'ils ont fait disparaître les sites web avec rien commun.
Ah bon?
Le fait 4 jours on démarre. Ils sont juste regardés un nouveau site, il y a les sites des élus par rien commun.
Ah d'accord.
C'est à nous, là.
Oui, il a disparu.
On avait créé, on avait
Pourquoi ils ont fait ça?
C'est minable.
Et qui a fait ça, tu sais?
Écoute, je ne sais pas. Je me renseigne, mais l'autre jour, il y a quelqu'un qui m'a dit, je suis allé chercher ton bouquin, ton livre, ton texte sur le chrono-urbanisme, parce que toi, c'était le premier texte que tu avais publié en juillet 2020 sur le chrono-urbanisme.
Absolument.
Et il m'a dit, je suis allé chercher pour parler en commun, il a fait, il n'existe pas. Je me suis connecté, effectivement. Je dis, il y a rien.
Attends, je vais vérifier quand même.
Allez chercher.
Incroyable.
We will start.
Yeah.
And so we'll start. We'll go there. I'll go on the far side. Maybe Carlos, you go in the middle, and Jean-Louis.
Okay.
Jean-Louis, you sit on the left at the minute, and then.
Now?
Yeah, we just because I'm going to introduce you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go.
So let's go.
Yeah.
Regardez. I sit here.
I'll sit here.
Okay, I sit here.
We'll put Carlos in the middle.
Okay.
Tu regarderas, il y a un
Oui, je regarderai.
And then you go down there to present from there.
Okay, nice.
Good evening and welcome to the London School of Economics, for those of you who are in the room and a very large number of people who are not in the room, but around the world to attend this event. It's the first time I'm nervous and excited that I'm seeing human beings in the room. It's the first live event with a public audience at the LSE that I've chaired for 2.5 years. So it's very exciting. And we chose this large room because we thought we might have to have 2-meter distances between the people when we booked it, when we knew that we were doing this with you. So it's nice to see so many of you in the room, in the flesh for this event. I'm Ricky Burdett, and together with a number of colleagues who are here, run a research center called LSE Cities. And today we're having a discussion about a topic which captures enormous global attention about the 15-minute city. And we have, in fact, not just one, but 2 people to, in a way, talk about this. And it's Carlos Moreno and Jean-Louis Misica, and I'll introduce both of them in a moment. This event has been made possible by the Obel Foundation, which is represented here by board members and the director, who, again, I will in a moment explain what the connection is between Carlos Moreno and the Obel Foundation and last year's, in fact, award. For those of you who are attending and listening to this remotely, but also those of you in the room, there is a hashtag for this event. You can see it up there, but it's LSE 15-minute city. The structure of the evening is going to be quite simple. After my introduction, Carlos will give a sort of 40-minute presentation. I will have to stop him, I'm telling you now. I've only met him for the last 5 hours, but I know I will have to stop him. So, and this is an Anglo-Saxon audience. So then, you know, they just get up, they walk out. So, right. And after that, so it's a warning. After that, there will be a sort of 10-15-minute conversation with Jean-Louis and Carlos, and then we will have a Q&A with people from the room. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take questions from the Zoom webinar. It's just a bit too complicated for the LSE technology at the moment, but I'm sure there will be many of you who want to ask questions. When we come to that, there are roving mics, 2 stewards in the room. Can you wait for a mic to come to you so that everyone can hear what is being said? If you want, please stand up, it's just useful, and say who you are, and just ask a question. Don't make a long statement, because you know, otherwise, we plan to end by 8 o'clock, and then we can all go and have dinner. Yeah, fine, okay. 8 o'clock evening. Right, okay. Now, to introduce Carlos briefly and Jean-Louis in a moment, I think it is interesting how the 15-minute city has become, as I've already said, a sort of global phenomenon. And I was thinking before we were together with the executive masters in cities students who are all here, participants, to whom Carlos spoke earlier, and reflecting together that effectively this brand, this name, and this is something Ben Rogers and I have been talking about, is nearly more influential than any other term in the last 20 years. And it's been sort of invented by someone who trained as a specialist in science and robotics, artificial intelligence, and not a planner. And that's quite an interesting issue, and it will become clear, I think, when you present why that is. In fact, Carlos is a professor at the University of Paris at the Sorbonne in, I've got to get it right, because it's Scientific Director of Entrepreneurship, Territory, and Innovation. It's not the School of Planning and all that. And that is simply because Carlos has always been interested for many, many years of your life in complex systems generally. And he sort of took on the city as the most complex system possible in many ways, and we'll be talking about that. Carlos was born and spent much of his life, early life in Bogota, in Colombia. No, brought up in Colombia, not necessarily Bogota. And in Cali, another wonderful amazing city, in fact, many ways. And his list of sort of achievements are very long, and I won't go through them because otherwise we will not end the evening on time. But clearly, and this is then leads to Jean-Louis Misika, his most recent sort of role as an advisor, special advisor to Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, and her deputy, Jean-Louis Misika. They worked together for many years. And in fact, Jean-Louis has been the deputy mayor under two different mayors, Delanoë and then Misika, responsible.
Hidalgo. Hidalgo, you said Misika.
What did I say? The wrong.
Misika.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Delanoë and Hidalgo.
I'm not yet married.
Right. Sorry. Ambitious. But what is interesting is that therefore, in many ways, Jean-Louis and Anne Hidalgo were sort of the commissioned you to take forward this idea, which you will no doubt explain, has become part of a political manifesto. I think for those of us in London, the notion that you can take a sort of spatial manifesto and get you elected on that basis is extremely interesting. The final thing I want to say is referring to the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Award. This is a relatively new award. You will see a leaflet on your seats, which describes what it's about and who's actually involved. And it's interesting, I'm going to read out part of the citation. It's a prize which is designed to recognize work that offers seminal solution to the challenges of facing cities, but that this project, so it's effectively the 15-minute city that won, not you, right? Yeah, sort of. It was recognized as an intuitive concept that has the capacity to deliver tangible change in people's lives. So in that sense, it's seen as both high level, but also quite practical in terms of what happens on the ground. So with that, I would like to suggest, Carlos, that you go straight to the screen. It's probably best if you don't walk around too much because the camera is capturing you and everyone virtually is seeing you. And if otherwise, they'll just see a blank screen. But we will have, obviously, your presentation shown both virtually and in the room. So can you please welcome our two speakers for tonight? So can we? So we need a bit of help here.
Perfect.
You want to do it with the
No,
keyboard?
it's
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ricky. Very grateful for this kind of invitation. Thank you for all. Thank you for coming. Delighted to be here for sharing with you during 40 minutes my passion for citizens to discuss today on this topic, the new proximities, and in particular, the 50-minute city concept. In this moment, now, in India and in Pakistan, several cities have very high temperatures, 50 degrees. Now, currently, this is the reality today. I took this picture 10 years ago, 12 years ago, maybe, in India, in Hyderabad. And I consider that this is the most precious definition of our topics in cities. Obesity is a serious metabolic disorder. I consider that we need to take this idea that cities are alive. We need to understand the metabolism of cities if we want to define the new paradigms for imagining how could anticipate the challenges. I'm so sorry.
It's not working. second. Oh, just,
Yeah, just to the keyboard.
I think, yeah. You get another 3 minutes.
Okay. I said obesity is a serious disorder, and we need to consider cities alive if we wanted to anticipate the phase with challenges. This is the reality today. We needed to define a new trajectory if we wanted to avoid this disaster today in our planet. And of course, this is our challenge today to consider in this world that is changing the planetary threshold. We have been reaching, unfortunately, the level of 400 particles per million of CO2. And this is a dangerous situation for all humanity. And in fact, this situation is totally related by this Anthropocene epoch. And today we need to consider the role, the key role of cities in this human activity. 3 weeks ago, the IPCC, with the report of the working group of 3, said we needed to develop an ambitious roadmap for changing our lifestyles, in particular in cities. The chapter 8, cities, the chapter 9, transportation, and the chapter 10 of the IPCC report is very, very clear. We need to increase the localism. We need to develop a new shorter circuits. We need to develop more and more implementation of proximities for reducing our CO2 emissions, and to define the most important point in systemic effect. In reality, if we consider this century, the 21st century, we said this is the century of cities. And in fact, we have for the next decades, for the next years, this concrete representation of the world. I like this picture. This is the representation based on mathematical anamorphosis made by our colleague Hemmings in Oxford. And in this anamorphosis, we have 2 ratios: the ratio of surface and human population. And we could observe these 3 elements. The first one, we have this switch of the world toward an overcrowded population in the east-south axis. The second point, the role of megacities and metropolises. You have today almost 15% of the world population that lives in only 35 cities. And the third point, we could observe the blue lines. This is the new war. The war is the information. This is the worldwide underwater optical fibers for delivering this permanent and massive hyperconnectivity ubiquity. This is the most precise representation today of the Anthropocene epoch. And of course, in a continent as not our Europe, this is today a reality. More than in the European Union of continents, we have in the European Union of cities with the very different densities, with the very different size, with the different cultural context. And we need, I said to the students of Reiki early, we needed to discover, define the invariants in different cities, regardless of the size, regardless of the density, regardless of the different cultural
context. And in fact, today, this is our focus with my research team when we have decided to take cities as our main topic. We need to consider the role of new technologies or digitalization in cities, because after the emergence of internet, the emergence of mobile phone, the emergence of Internet of Things, this is today a real hybridization between this century of cities and this century of massive hybridization. We need to have today digital citizens connected for be involved in the collective activity for developing the urban common good. But today, our common enemy, in fact, is this new presence of the massive zombie geek. I define a zombie geek as these people hyper-connected anytime, any place, and socially totally disconnected. And in cities, we have been emerging this phenomenon of aggregation, of Google, of fake news, of loss of democracy, because this double phenomenon of the one hand, a very concentrated urbanization, and on the other hand, this massive bubble considered by new technologies is today and point for define what is in fact our roadmap, what is in reality our political issues. I consider that we are here. Orwell, Bradbury, Huxley, or to reinvent the nature with Alexander von Humboldt. And the former mayor of Curitiba, Jaime Lerner, died recently, 2 years ago, said cities are the problem and cities have the solution. This is the daily reality in some of cities around the world. Are polluted, scarcity water, natural resources with very, very fragile. And for 2 years, we have been living with this COVID-19 pandemic crisis. In reality, if we consider this global situation, if we consider this global threat, global warming, massive urbanization, massive hyperconnectivity, and massive social disconnection, the emergence of COVID-19 in our planet, the role of cities, the predominance of the urban and territorial attitudes, we needed to respond collectively to this essential question. The question is not in what country we want to live. The real question is in a daily life, in what kind of city do we want to live in? This is the real question today. And the 15-minute city and its twin concept, the 30-minute territory, because we have two twin concepts, is a systemic approach for answering this question. This is a systemic approach because we need to consider the ecological challenges. Of course, we need to reach the carbon neutrality at the horizon 2050. This is compulsory, this is mandatory, we don't have choice. But sustainability, this is at the same time an economical challenge. We need to create added value. We need to create employment. We need to create wealth. We need to create local jobs. We need to have a vibrant economy. And this is the second challenge today. And of course, we need to anticipate the social crisis. The Yellow Vest, this is a very good example for researchers and academic people, but the politicians as well. Because one of the reasons of these violent demonstrations was these long distances for joining work during 45 minutes, 1 hour in an individual car, when the carbon taxes was this effect to increase the price of fuel. Ecology, economy, and social topics are at the heart of our 50-minute city, 30-minute time. This is my intellectual path. This is my intellectual trajectory, of course. I pay tribute to longer colleagues that for decades have contributed to develop these new ideas of a compact city, the new urbanism, the new pedestrianism, the chrono-urbanism with François Hacher, with Luc Butarski, the systemic vision with Edgar Morin, the topophilia with the Latin American writers, Gabo Marquez, and the Swedish Nordic thinkers on time geography, in particular Thorsten Agerstrand. And of course, the Bruxelles declarations, la Déclaration de Bruxelles in 80s, because this is one of the most important elements for developing another thought very different of the Athene chart. And today, I want to, in fact, to highlight this contribution of Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs said we need to understand the city metabolism. We need to consider that the city is sustainable if the city is alive. And Jane Jacobs, when she proposed the concept of livable cities, the concept of living cities, she said, a livable city is a city when we have in any time, in any place, a multiplicity of choices. This is for me an obsession, to have the possibility to offer a lot of choices in any time and in any place. For that, we need to consider a new urban and territorial framework. We need to shift our mindset. In this time of digitalization, in this time of climate change, in this time of these economic challenges, I consider in this way that we need to develop a new relation between the urban space, the territorial space, and the time, in particular, the useful time. Because during several decades, with the modern urbanism, in fact, we are used to accept naturally long distances, long journeys, to accept this separation, to accept this fragmentation, to accept these fractures in the specialized cities. We have accepted the unacceptable. To live with this loss of our useful time. And my concept with the 50-minute city, in fact, is based on this definition of sustainable city. to have a ecological, economical, and social positive impact for having a city valuable, equitable, and livable. And I consider that the key factor is to consider how could we define the quality of life. And for defining the quality of life, we need the first point to take a useful time to transform our daily life, to define proximities as a new battle. In face to different challenges with this specialized city, segmented city, I consider that we have today a new battle. The battle for defining a new relationship between space and time. I proposed just after the COP21 in Paris, with the state nations have signed the Paris Agreement in different way, because I consider that the COP21, this is a wonderful agreement between the state, but we needed to redefine the role of city, and in this way, not only no longer with technical measures, but to define a different, radically urban and territorial social organizations. I consider that we have a very heavy heritage of specialized and centralized cities. And in October 2016, I proposed this concept of a polycentric city based on 4 concrete implementation, intensive proximity, massive mixity, social mixity, functional mixity, a real organic density, and no longer promiscuity, because we have used to live in the sometimes proximity, promiscuity in popular districts, and ubiquity for take advantage of this technological year. This is de facto today a very popular concept around the world, and we could find in some cities, Buenos Aires, Melbourne, Boston, Busan, Zurich has voted by referendum in December the 50-minute city for transforming Zurich in a distributed city with 31 new districts. This is Milan with a very significant commitment of the mayor of Milan, Giuseppe Sala, head of the COVID-19 recovery task of the C40 cities. And this is a very concrete transformation of one of the districts of Milan, Piazza Loreto. Today, this is the new centralities. In a few months, we will have a new centrality, Merlata. This is the project announced by Giuseppe Sala for delivering new services in less than 15 minutes for citizens in the Great Milan, 260 million euros announced. Our idea was, in fact, to propose a new model based on this paradigm of proximities, regardless of the density, regardless of the size. And in this case, we wish, in reality, to apply this model in different configurations, very high compact density, the hypercenter, and to deploy as well in very low densities, even in the rurality. For that, in mathematics, we needed to search in permanence the conditions for discovering the invariance, the condition that we could modify after the different level, but with a permanent presence, we have the possibility to modify the concrete context. In reality, the 50-minute city for the compact zone and the 30 minutes territory for the middle and low density is in the doxa. This is a roadmap based on some invariants for proposing a new path, a new trajectory in order to change our urban and territorial lifestyle. We need to fight against 3 invariants in all metropolises around the world. In London, Paris, Buenos Aires, in Shenzhen, we have in all circumstances these 3 elements related to the daily life in this metropolization process. The first one, long commute, more than 1 hour for joining from my home to my office. More in Latin America, almost 3 hours for a round trip. This is the case in Bogota or in Buenos Aires. The second one, the misuse of building, because the functionalism, the consequence is, of course, to use a building in infrastructures for one task during the day. I said the rate of uses of a building in Paris is less than 40%, just using a building during the day. At the opposite, of course, during 60 to 70%, a building is empty, in perfect conditions, totally already for use. This is unsustainable because we have thousands and thousands of square meters in all cities unused. Of course, the first point, this is the loss of social interactions because we live in a residential area. During the day, this is empty. And when we leave our district for working, is totally empty. In Paris, this is the case. We have in the west of Paris 1 million of square kilometers, La Défense, for hosting 400,000 workers, multiplied by 2 with the different other services. And the after 6 p.m., after 7 p.m., this big infrastructure today is almost empty, less than 20% after COVID-19. For that, we said that, we need, with the 50-minute city, propose this new urban and territorial narrative. Based on this idea, how to use better and more the infrastructure that existed today. The Copenhagen, this is one of the guidelines for the prescribed price to use different building that existed today and to reuse, to have a more intensive, but we need, if we wanted to use differently the infrastructure that exists, the key question is to offer services anytime, anywhere. The 50-minute city, in fact, is based on this ambitious project, intensive proximity for developing a lot of activities. The second point, to have for different users a triple impact: ecological, economical, and social impact. The third point, to develop more and more human interactions for enhancing social life. The fourth point, to develop an inclusive transformation for more democracy, more transparency, more otherness. Ecology, proximity, citizen engagement, and the new business model for cities. The risk for cities when we have decided to embrace the 50-minute city is the risk of generate a new process of gentrification. For that, I said to different mayors, to different local governments, we need to prevent this danger for having a new gentrification based on the improvement of several districts in several points of the city, and to deliver to private sector, to market, the final decision for how could we use this improvement of our quality of life. The 15-minute city in reality needs a very strong commitment of mayors, of local governments for developing the urban common good, based on this idea of Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize in 2009. The urban common good, this is the set of material or immaterial resources present in a competitive economy for escaping to the speculative market. And we need, with the 15-minute city, to define a roadmap in order to preserve the urban common good. And for that, we need the new financial and administrative tools for preserving this capability of the urban common good. We have several new tools with the city's commercial property, for example, the social housing with the real estate companies of cities, participatory budget, the ambitious urban policies based on regulation. The 15-minute city is based on this scientific contribution. My contribution is this picture. We have defined, in reality, a new social circularity based on 6 essential urban and territorial functions. We have proposed, in fact, to define a new kinds of proximity by the access to these 6 social functions: to live in the good conditions with the organic density, to work without long commute, to supply with the shorter circuits, to take care of the mental and physical health, to learn, to access to education and culture, to enjoy, to reconquer public space for human and not for car, to have biodiversity and air and water without pollution. This model, we consider that we need to provide an access within a short perimeter, 15 minutes in a compact zone between 0 and 40 kilometers, and 30 minutes for the middle and low density between 40 kilometers and 100 kilometers. In the 30 minutes territory, this is the same concept based on the same urban and territorial social function. However, we need to include in the low density zone, the middle density zone, the mobility by car, in this case, with electrical cars, on-demand transport, autonomous vehicles in the next 2 times, and carpooling, sharing pooling. We have developing as well 3 new indicators for defining the quality of life. 3 indicators: my personal well-being with my family. The second one, the indicator of my sociability with my neighbor and my work colleagues. And the first one, my indicator of sustainability, my daily ecological attitude, and my otherness. This is the high quality societal living matrix. And we have proposed to different policymakers to develop this social circularity for having a new organization of these social functions, we have been developing this ontological model. The ontologic model is to define what it means to live, to work, to supply, to care, to educate, to enjoy. We have defined for the different locations in the city. Today, with the digitalization, we could identify in a very, very small grid, 100 meters by 100 meters, to define the uses available or not, services, infrastructures. And for each one of infrastructures, we could define how to use each one of them. What is the rate of frequentation? In fact, some people thought that the 50-minute city or the 30-minute territory, this based only in the metric proximity. And I said it's wrong. The 50-minute city, the 30-minute territory, this is a vision of the new urban and territorial organization based on 3 different levels. The most popular level, the most known level, this is the level of local services, because this is the level of daily proximity. But we have in the concept, in the model of 50-minute city and 30-minute territory, 2 other levels. The level of the mutualized services, the intermediate services, using in particular new technologies. And you have a 3rd level, the level of central services oriented in order to manage the city by the local governments, mayors, or president of metropolis. In fact, we needed to implement this model based on these hybridizations. The metric proximity, the digital proximity, and the urban policy centralized by political vision of the mayor of the local governments. Several people consider that the 50-minute city is on the left. In fact, no, the 50-minute city is on the right. We wanted to generate a new kind of social organization, the new urban available services, the new territorial availability of services. And we have been considered this kind of way. You have 6 pillars for each one of social functions: to live, to work, to supply, to care, to live, to enjoy. We have 3 sectors: the metric proximity, the intermediate proximity, and the centralized urban policy. You have 3 indicators: my well-being, my socialization, and my ecological impact. And we needed to explore 100 meters by 100 meters the different resources, material or immaterial, that exist in order to develop a massive generation of intersections. We need to develop this massive generation of intersections in building, in infrastructures, public space, vertical spaces, horizontal spaces, for having this massive mixity of uses of social functions and social categories. And in reality, the roadmap, because the 50-minute city or the 30-minute territory is not a magic wand. This is a roadmap. This is a long journey for transforming several decades of the centralized urbanism or the segmented urbanism. We need to implement this holistic roadmap for going towards a new model of polycentricity. We have developing with my team in cooperation with several mayors around the world, in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia, several tools based on this multi-design approach. We have developing the proximity fresk. We have developing the tools for prototyping. We have defined the algorithm for helping local governance or stakeholders for define the functional polymorphism, the multipurpose function, and we have defined the new tools for having this collaborative methodology. I said two different measures when I received their proposal for helping them. The 15-minute city is a long journey, and we need to stay in the course over time. This is not a motto for an electoral campaign or for marketing actions. This is a real commitment during several years for developing this transformation, for escaping to this centralized vision, to escape to this vision of my center, the compact zone, the suburbs, the outskirts, and for developing this decentralized new shape of city or territory. We need to change the relations between space and time for developing a real better quality of life, for having a useful time, for developing a humanistic ecology, for renewing trust and respect for others with the otherness. This is the concept applied for the city of Paris by the mayor Anne Hidalgo with the electoral campaign with Jeremy Sika. This is the Paris en Commun civic movement committed by, led by Jeremy Sika and with my enthusiastic participation for proposing this concept to Parisians. This is before the vote. And in fact, we need to deploy the very concrete tools for changing these three elements at the same time. A new pace for the city, for changing the hectic rhythm, for breaking the long distances, the long journeys, the chrono-urbanism. We need to develop a new chronotopia for developing the massive multipurpose functions. We need to develop a new urban culture for changing the mindset of citizens based on topophilia for loving differently and more our place. We need to reinvent this polycentric and multipurpose vicinity. We have been in Paris before to start this new mandature by Anne Hidalgo, and then very, very nice historical for transforming public spaces with the different actions for pedestrianizing city, for developing a bikeable city. This is the new decisions took by Anne Hidalgo with the 15-minute city. This is a little example, but this is the symbolic first decision took by Anne Hidalgo in December. 2 minutes, yeah, I have now. It's okay. We have decided to open the schoolyards for different activities. We have 169 schools in cities. This is the totality of the public spaces will be open for hosting whole neighborhood, for developing different activities. And I wanted to highlight for finish these actions because this is very, very important to consider the local economy, the local jobs, the local commerce, to consider that this is the common good for developing the economy, developing social links, for resisting to digital platforms. We have a commercial property, the CMAEST. We have decided with the 15-minute city to reinforce this commercial property. This is a 100% subsidy of the city of Paris. And the role of CMAEST is to manage the location in whole city, or on top of that, to buy the new square meters for renting in order to install libraries, artisans, bakery, etc., for developing the local commerce. And the price, of course, for renting is below the price of the speculative real estate market, because in the opposite, we will only the possibility for having shows and luxury things. The participative budget, this is a very, very powerful tool as well. We have now 25% of the investments for fostering citizens to be involved in the local activities. The private sector today, just for finishing, is totally interested in this way. For my team, for us, this is a very new, passionate step, because we have open discussion with several investors, several real estate developers around the world. Our latest partner is the International Federation of Real Estate, FIAPSI, totally committed for being involved to develop this concept, because we needed to transform our work style. With the COVID-19, this is a new opportunity for developing a new business model based on the mix of work, daily life, health, medical centers, theater, etc. The corporate working, this is a new term. I coined this term with the mayor of Milan, Giuseppe Sala, during the period of pandemic, during the lockdown, with the advisor Cristiana Tajani. And with Cristiana Tajani, we have worked hard for developing this concept of the corporate working. The corporate working, this is a new innovative idea with a real hybridization between the location, physical location, the hub in different areas in the city or the metropolis, and by the algorithm, we have the possibility to inform employees, workers, for going in the most close location for working during several hours or 1 day, 2 days, and in order to avoid to go every day to the corporate central office. This is a very, very powerful concept. And today we have a new generation of real estate developers. In London, you have the International Workplace. I have some collaboration of them. And the latest researches of this team is very interesting for us, because we have today more than 60% of the work population between 20 and 40 years interested in we need two powerful digital platforms for that, to identify different profiles of user of the city, and to define the new users for defining the concrete benefit in the daily life. We have most applications in several cities in France or around the world based on digital technologies for identifying how could we improve the quality of life of this model in the compact zone, but as well in rurality. This is a very, very important work today in the very, very impressive low density zone for implementing this concept. Thank you. I'm finished.
Okay, thank you very much. So oops. In a moment, I'm going to ask Jean-Louis to tackle some of these, let's call it quite broad issues that you've raised. Some of them incredibly elegant as a sort of mathematical model. To in a way check with you, how does that algorithm, how does that perfect model fit the messy city? Right? I think that's something that
But the answer is very simple. It doesn't fit.
Okay. Okay. Can I just ask you one question before we turn to Jean-Louis, which is there's a sort of interesting assumption that increasing proximity, one of the key concepts, but make sure that you travel less and you have stuff closer to each other, right? That's the very clear and important concept.
Job or virtual job.
Yeah. How, when it comes to where you live, where you work, and where you do everything else, how can you guarantee, let's call it that someone who lives here will actually work there simply because there's a space? I mean, I think that's something which is interesting for us to check. Just to reflect on that for a moment, and then I'd like, please answer. You have more time.
In fact, we have today a double phenomenon. On the one hand, after COVID-19, in particular, the young workers from 20 until 14 years have decided to change radically our work life. This is the latest research of the International Workplace. And the companies, the corporate sector, I think that they are totally aware that we need to transform the work style. And we have two possibilities. It is possible to transform my job by the new proximities, real or digital. But at the same time, there are people with have this impossibility because we have only 60% of jobs, and 40% we need the real presence. But the double phenomenon. The second phenomenon, this is the scientific name, this desaturation, because we have the possibility for reducing, for limiting the constraint mobilities, for having a multiple access in proximity. Automatically, we have another phenomenon of the desaturation, the evaporation in the mobilities. This is the same phenomenon for walking. And in this case, we could continue to increase the quality of life with more and more services in the proximity, even if, in my particular case, we need to take some way for going until 40
But of
minutes.
course, what you're talking about requires incredible intervention, both in the market and where people live and in government. Right? And I think, Jean-Louis, given that you were the deputy mayor for, broadly speaking, planning and economic development, right?
Yeah.
In a city, let's remind ourselves that Paris, the city of Paris is 2 million people in a region of 11 million. So actually who controls what, who determines what is also very important. What are your reflections on this model and its application in terms of governance?
Well, first of all, I want to say that we work together, Carlos and I, and for example, during the campaign of Anne Hidalgo, we use the concept of 15-minute city. But for the pleasure of the conversation now, I'm going to criticize a little bit the concept. And my first question is, who governs the 15-minute city? Because it's a real important question, you know, because the smaller the territory, the smaller the number of inhabitants, the more conservative the policy. And even sometimes this policy is pure immobilism. And we have a very good example around Paris. You have cities of 5,000 inhabitants where the mayor refused to even to build one building, you know. And of course, they are not interested at all with the question of public transportation and things like that. So the question of governance, I think, is crucial. And of course, if you say that the governance of the 15-minute city have to be at the level of the territory of the 15-minute city, you will have big problems. For example, in London, if you say more power to the borough or in Paris, if you say more power to the Conseil d'arrondissement, it would be a nightmare. I can tell you, because it will be very difficult.
Would be a nightmare because?
Well, because it's very difficult to convince a mayor of a small territory to make a policy which is useful for the people who are not voting in the territory. And in fact, I think that I will give you some figures if you don't mind. I think that we elect representatives of the places where we sleep. This is very strange, you know, but not of places where we work, where we study, where we have leisure time. And some critics speak of the democracy of sleeping, to refer to the fact that only those who sleep on the territory have the right to vote. And you have million people who are working or living in the territory, but not have the right to vote on this territory. And some figures. In France, in today's France, 2 out of 3 employees work in a commune, in a municipality other than that of their residence. And the average distance between home and work is around 30 kilometers. So you can imagine the question you have to, and 30% of the working population of the Greater Paris, I am not speaking of the small Paris, I'm speaking of the Greater Paris, 30% of these people live outside this territory. And even 6% of the people who are working in the Greater Paris live outside the region of Île-de-France. So, and the last point, every day in Paris, 1 million people are coming to work and don't live and vote in the territory. So you have to keep in mind all this data to understand that the question of governance is maybe the main question. And if you say that the territory has to be managed by the people who are on the territory, you are creating a system of segregation, even ghettoization, which could be a total nightmare. This is why it's so complicated.
So there is a degree, given what you've just said, that this model does require a degree of top-down decision-making, right? I mean, and given that you're working with cities, regions, states, and also interestingly what you were saying at the end, but also with private sector actors and others, what are your reflections on them? Let's call it the impact on democracy, to put it bluntly.
Yes, of course. In fact, Gianluca is right with this reflection about the governance. We need to define a governance compliant with this new path, a new trajectory. In reality, I said, Gianluca, that today we live in unsustainable cities. The data, of course, we have today in Paris. I said to students one hour ago, 1.3 million of workers cross Paris with the railway from the east to the west. Every day, 1.2 million. And we have a small concentration in 1 million of square kilometers for hosting almost 1 million people. And the population of Paris is multiplied by 2 during the day. We have 2 million inhabitants. And in fact, we have 4 million during the day. This is the people that close the city.
But given all these statistics
Okay.
and the scale, does that mean you, in order to implement this plan in a way that it works, you need a regional governance authority, which doesn't exist in France.
We
in
need
Paris.
three levels. We need, in all circumstances, we need three levels. Then the local governance, in this case, the metropolitan governance, for example. This is not the case in Paris. We don't have a real metropolitan governance, but we need in a region, in a metropole area governance. But we need the intermediate levels for developing this decentralized urban policy. And we need to deploy the concrete transformation of proximities for hosting different services, in particular the public services, and to deploy the private activities for developing this local economy. Because we have a challenge today. We are to face with unsustainable cities for working, for having public space, for having air polluted, for having air and water not polluted. We need to transform this situation. What are our possibilities today? To continue to live today in this centralized model? This is not possible. The situation today in several cities around the world is really dramatic. And we needed to propose a new way, a new trajectory, a new path. And in my opinion, for example, the internet revolution really was the revolution of decentralization, because we have this possibility for accessing to multiple information with several different centers. And I consider that we have this possibility to offer local services, public service, and to install private companies.
But you know well that there are some critics out there of for example, your model, and I'm intrigued to bring Jean-Louis in here. And I'm thinking obviously of our friend and colleague, Ed Glazer.
Yeah, I know very well.
Who you engage with often on these debates, who says that the danger of your model is that in some cases it can exacerbate social difference, that it only will work for the middle classes, right? You know, that gentrification plus.
And even upper
And
middle
you
class,
were the deputy mayor at the time. You must have also been attacked.
Yeah.
And how do you see that as a reality of what's could happen to Paris or not?
No. Yes, of course. Of course, I think that all the big cities, all the global cities, there is a threat of segregation and separation of communities, not only on the basis of revenue, of wealth, but also on the basis of race or ethnical origin and so on. And sometimes, of course, it's good. It's a good thing to have people with some community in the city. When you say, for example, like Little China for Paris to characterize the 13th district, it's a reality, and it's a good and fine reality. But the question is, how do you manage to maintain the mixity in the city? And I think that the question is more and more that people have to do and have a say on the places where they do not live, where they do not sleep. You know, I think this is a very important thing. And maybe we can imagine some new system of voting where you can vote, have a say where you sleep, but also have a say where you work, and have a say where you are going to the hospital, or have a say when where you are studying. And for example, I think that one of the most terrible situation in France, and I'm sure it's the same here in the United Kingdom, is that this gap, this fight between the people who have voted for Mr. Macron and the people who have voted for Mrs. Le Pen is also a territorial thing, you know. And and the question of relegation, the question of people feeling that they are not important and they don't have access to the best amenities of a city is the main question. And in Paris, we have this problem because when you look at the little Paris, it's already a 15-minute city. Mm-hmm. When you live in a quarter like the 11e arrondissement, you have all the amenities by foot at 15 minutes, sometimes less. Yeah. So the question is, when you go further the ring road, and let's say 10 kilometers after the ring road, you don't have this. So the question is how you manage these new centralities.
I agree with Ed Glaser and for the suburbs in France. I have a different vision because we need to consider not the short term, we need to consider the mid-term. How could we transform this situation in the next decade? It's not possible to transform in just a few weeks, a few months, 1 year. The amount of investments in France for these suburbs is 10 billion euros per year. And our control of the public control, the Cour des Comptes, said the problem in the suburbs in Paris, this territoriality, is the absence of public services, the absence of local economy, the absence of local jobs. The average for going to work is 90 minutes, 120 minutes. This is an unsustainable situation. We need to develop, not in Paris, the 15-minute city only for the 17th district. We need to develop a polycentric great metropolises. We need to deploy employment in different communes, different places, in different suburbs.
In an odd way, and I'm sure this will come up with some of the questions, you could say that London, because of its very nature, the way it was created with its urban villages, is far more polycentric than Paris. And in fact, perhaps this model could work more, relatively speaking, easily, even though you did enrich your 15-minute city with the 30-minute territory. So you've taken me slightly aback in terms of understanding. Let's see whether we have some.
Maybe I can say.
Yeah, go on. Then I want to open up to the floor.
It would be a short.
Yeah.
And, I think that urban sprawl is the main problem because when you have you need, if you want public services, you need a high level of density. You need a compact city. You cannot have public services. You cannot have an hospital or a nursery when you have so low number of population in a city. So and this is a chicken and egg problem because the mayors of these cities doesn't want to densify. So if you want public services, you need density, of course. And this is the main problem that we have in the region of Paris, and I think all over the world.
Okay, let's. Can I see some hands if there are any questions? And in a moment, and as I said, please say who you are very briefly. If you want, stand up, that's great, so that we can see you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. My name's Charlie Hicks. I'm a researcher at LSE Cities, and with another hat, I'm a local politician in Oxford. So my question's for Jean-Louis. I'm incredibly impressed by Anne Hidalgo's and your work. My question is particularly when it comes to making cars lower priority, taking away car parking, reallocating road space. How were you and Anne able to keep your political colleagues on side, especially if they weren't fully behind the vision and they were getting loud public backlash? What narratives, how did you keep them on board?
You have a new confidence.
Thank you.
So you have to be used to be insulted first. And we have invented a new concept, which is Hidalgo bashing. Hidalgo bashing was what we lived during 2 and 3 years when we closed the main highway along the river, along the Seine. Well, most seriously, I think that of course, you have strong enemies when you do that, but you need to build a coalition of friends. And who are your friends? Your friends are pedestrians. Your friends are children. Your friends are, of course, bikers, and bikers are very high. They have a very high voice when they are enough in quantity. So you need to, for example, I think that we began very slowly the question of bike lanes and the fight to see who owns the public space. Is the public space the property of drivers, of car drivers, or is the public space the property of other people in the city? And when we had a level of bike lanes enough, I would say between 100 and 200 kilometers in Paris, we had some people who understand what we were doing. And the second point is you need to be calm and play with style, because Carlos spoke about evaporation of vehicles when you close roads, or when you suppress some parking lots. Generally, the evaporation lasts during 1 year.
Yeah.
So what I used to say to the people of the municipality was a very classical words: be calm and make another study.
Mm-hmm.
So because the first study is generally disastrous.
Let's go to another question.
Okay.
There was one there, and okay, one right in the middle. Yeah. You can pass 2 microphones and to the gentleman there, yeah, with the mask. Yeah. So you're first, and then you're next.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexandre Bronstein. I'm a student here at the LSE in City Design and Social Science. I have quite a specific question, and I promise to be succinct. As the COVID pandemic and its successive lockdowns have proven, living in a 15-minute city requires a number of key workers: delivery service, public sanitation, health.
You speak too close.
Too
close
close to the
bit
mic.
further away.
Does that go?
That's better.
At least you can hear me.
And more slowly.
So make your neck a little.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Like this? Thank you very much.
Um,
Sorry. I'll begin again. As the COVID pandemic and its successive lockdowns have proven, living in a 15-minute city requires a certain number of key workers: delivery service, public sanitation, health and social care, etc., in order to assure its logistical functioning. Where will these people live if, by definition, they have to go and work somewhere else? Do you think that scaling up the 15-minute city model risks creating a fracture between 15-minute neighborhoods and non-15-minute neighborhoods from which key workers have to commute? And in light of the profoundly unequal employment structure of the gig economy as well as other economic sectors, do you think that just as mobility currently is, accessibility risks becoming the next social-economic fault line in society between the people that can afford to live in a 15-minute city and those that have to work?
This
to
is an
assure
essay
its
now.
Logistical functioning. Thank you very much.
There are nearly too many issues, but I mean, one of the issues raised is around the effect of the pandemic and what key workers, how do they become accommodated in your model? Let's take that. Then the gig economy, another one, we'll see. Yeah.
In fact, before the pandemic, when with my team, we have started to reflect on proximities, we have decided for our model to take the medical sector. This is as a, and we have been exploring the situation of medical sector, doctors, nurses, etc. And at the same time to understand their job, in particular the local jobs in the hospital, the nomadic situations, doctors with an average of 100 kilometers per day for going to different places, or at the opposite, nurses that live just in front of the hospital. In reality, we don't have a situation considered that the general. This is very, very different situation. This is not the same situation, a doctor single with a doctor with married, with the children, etc. We have defined a model based on the profile for identifying, and this is a very, very good question, because it is not only the job of the doctor. We need to consider the global environment. For that, we said that our methodology is a systemic approach, because we need to consider the doctor, we need to consider his family, we need to consider the job of in their couple, the other, and etc. And this is, in fact, we have some of key workers, because we have the doctor, we have the teacher, we have the police, we have the public service. Our methodology is based on to define the societal profile more than a specific job. We have the societal profile, a couple, children, elderly people, young people, and to explore the different services that we need. That in Paris, for example, we have examined the different places for living for doctors. We don't have an area particularly with doctors.
I think what lies behind these sorts of appropriate questions that, and let's say, one wanted to be critical, say, is investing in proximity enough? Now, I know you said you actually have 4 criteria, the second one of which is mixity. That could imply that actually you have to have a much stronger sort of planning regulation as to where you allocate things and how you fund them. Gentleman over there with the mask, thanks.
Hi, many thanks for the very meaningful presentation.
Maybe you can.
Can you take the mask off?
Take the mask
Sorry,
off.
sorry, thank you.
Many thanks for your very meaningful presentation and insightful talk. I'm Zhi Wei from UCL. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Geography. And my question is quite simple. Can this kind of 15-minute city as a global initiative to be implemented in the kind of context of global south?
Yeah.
And how can we do it, especially how to balance the socio-economic development and ecological protection? Thank you.
Yeah, very, very, very good question. I was born in Colombia, in the Global South. This is one of my priorities. Of course, I went to Argentina 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and I said earlier that it's very interesting because, for example, I went to Buenos Aires. This is the big metropolis, but I went to the very small cities, Santa Fe, in the border of Uruguay. And it is very particular because with the mayor of Santa Fe, he is very committed for deploying this methodology. We said that for many people in the popular districts, in the poor district, this is the real global south, with people without basic services. This is very, very paradoxical because their idea of the 50-minute city with the association, with the young association, women, unemployed people, said we need the 50-minute city for having public service, for having education, for having health services, for having employment, for having more public spaces. This is very, very interesting because a friend sent to me a photo with a demonstration with poor people. We need the 50-minute city, but in their mind, we need local services. We need more proximity for having a better quality of life. And I think that in the global south, this is the way. In Africa, for example, I have been working in Tunisia. This is the new context for breaking with this very, very strong segmentation between the poor.
You could nearly argue from what you're saying that the unregulated development in so many of the
Yes,
global south
totally.
developments is wired to work on a 15-minute city type model. There was I think a lady over there and a gentleman at the front. Why don't you both ask short questions, and then we will end with your feedback on both.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Julieta Cunio. I work at the Greater London Authority for the London Nights Are. We work on the 24-hour economy, not just the night economy. So my question relates to what my neighbor here said on the key workers. A lot of the work we do is about night workers. So you mentioned doctors, but there's also nurses that work in hospitals at night. They need to access healthy food when they finish their shifts. And the people that work in those restaurants need to be able to travel back and forth home in a safe, affordable, etc. way. They don't necessarily close. As a matter of fact, they tend to live quite far. So I think it's two quick questions. One, how does the 24-hour economy fit into the 15-minute city? And yeah, what about these key workers that, you know, by nature, they don't tend to leave? How do we make that better, I guess?
Okay, and let's have your second question then. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Alex Jan, former chief economist at Arab, and now I look after a couple of business improvement districts in London. My question is this. Some of our most successful cities and most sustainable cities, such as London, thrive on having certain sectors in very spatially concentrated. So theatres, financial services, hospitals, universities, and others. How does the 15-minute city model reconcile itself with what economists would call the benefits of agglomeration, associated with those very tight spatial concentrations of specialized sectors?
So can we, Jean-Louis, maybe you respond to either of these 2 points, and then Carlos, I'll ask you to conclude equally by addressing this issue.
Okay.
Well, I think that what you describe correspond to the central services designed by Carlos. I mean that a university is not a local service. An hospital is not a local service. It's a central service. And this is why it's so important to keep in mind that a school is a local service. Kindergarten is a local service. But when you go further and you look at the different category of services, you understand that. And this is why he's speaking of the 30-minute territory, but we can say also the 1-hour territory and maybe the 2 hours territory, because I know some people who are able to make a trip of 2 hours to go to the opera. And you cannot have more than, let's say, 2 or 3 opera in cities like Paris or London, but in cities like Toulouse or Lyon, you have 1 opera. Okay, so it means that you have to keep in mind the differences of the size of the service, the nature of the service, and this is why I am a fan of the 15-minute city, but because you have to keep in mind that all these central services are the amenities which make the cities attractive. And this attractivity is based on something more important than the distance you are making to go to have the
argument behind agglomeration economies. Can you give a final summary comment, but responding also to the issue of different forms of labor and the agglomeration economies, and then we end in 2 minutes.
Yeah, in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, in fact, we need to deploy another model for changing our daily life with this 3 levels of proximity. Of course, in the case of the worker of a restaurant, for example. This is the case with the supermarket, with people that unfortunately need 1 hour so far in the suburbs. I said to the different mayors, this is not a program for having the red flag in the for having the social or economic revolution. This is a new trajectory for changing our urban life in the perimeter possible for local governments for changing. My vision with the 50-minute city, with the 30-minute city, this is the localist vision. I didn't have the possibility for changing a national policy for developing the new social transformation or to have a revolution for increasing the wage, etc. For this kind of work, I said we need to improve their quality of life if we have the possibility to increase more and more services in proximity for them, for their children, for the ecosystem, even if they are this constraint for going to a job 1 hour with for going to the restaurant.
And
But-
Alex, is comment?
But just to, we have one very important positive impact. The key word is desaturation, because if you have more people with the possibility for accessing in proximity, we have the possibility for giving for the constrained mobility worker the possibility for accessing in the better conditions. If we have the possibility for reducing the peak hours, we have this deconcentrations equal desaturation. We need to reduce the pressure of the transportation. And I am totally convinced that in the jobs where it is possible to change these distances, this journey, we will have the same paradox, the mathematical paradox of the evaporation. This is the Netherlands mathematician Brahms. This is the Brahms paradox. The Brahms paradox, this is a mathematical model for delivering this evaporation 1 year, between 6 months and 1 year. I am totally convinced that with the 50-minute city, the 30-minute territory, if you have the possibility to modify the threshold of different variables, the 6 urban social functions, we will provoke in the middle term this Brahms paradox based on this evaporation. In our case, this is the Brahms paradox applied to the work conditions for working differently. And I am totally convinced that in the midterm, we will have a new urban social organization automatically in the same perspective of the internet when internet was born. This decentralized model with the provoke is a very important perturbation for several business models around the world. And today, this is totally normally to live.
This takes us,
decentralized new system.
This takes us straight back to where you started in terms of also your profession, interested in studying cities as systemic models.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're using language which actually most of us who talk about, write about cities don't use, which is, the language of nearly mathematics, what you've just said. So it's very interesting that you come to the LSE where, there are people in the room and elsewhere who develop economic models, mathematical models of how society should move, should work. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. In the end, it requires a new system of governance. I think that's what you've provoked, and I think you're agreeing. And also a real sense of realism in terms of timing. And, in a way, this last point you made is that it's not about changing the world today, because otherwise one is naive, right? But it is about sort of reshaping the paradigm so that a number of concepts, which I've learned today from you, which, around obviously the intensification of proximity, but the notion of actually identifying invariance, what is there in every city underneath the surface
The core of
is powerful. So on that, I'd like to thank Carlos Moreno, Johnny Misica, and the Obel Award for making this evening happen. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ricky, for the moderation.
You speak Italian, don't you?
Yeah.
Anch'io. Io sono italiano.
Ah, sono italiano.
Io sono italiano.
Di dove?
Roma.
Roma. Mi piace molto Roma.
Mamma romana.
Mamma era Roma. Mi piace molto. Il sindaco di Roma, Gualtieri, is totally
I haven't met, I'm meeting him next week.
with the Gualtieri.
Gualtieri, I'm having dinner with him on Wednesday of next week. So.
Gualtieri took the 50-minute city
Yeah.
for his electoral
right,
campaign.
okay, okay.
Ah, well, this is a fun.
Well, I will tell him on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Have you met Ben? Have you met before or no? He's coming for dinner too, so.
Okay, nice. Okay.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah,
Nice
fine.
to see you.
Nice to see you
Good
too.
to see you.
Yeah.
These are all your contemporaries.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
year that you
yeah.
haven't met. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm coming to the LSC in 2 weeks' time, yeah, for the Urban Night.
Ah,
Night
right.
program.
Okay, fine.
Yeah?
Okay, good. So
Yeah.
we
Are
can.
you going to be around? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Nice to see
then.
you. Yeah.